2 days after the London Bridge attack, these are two of the killers. Their identities are now public. But remarkably, in one case, Karam Butt, his jihadism seemed to be very public too. How on earth was he allowed to end up in a murderous rampage in the capital?
I was one of the chief radicalizers and recruiters for Al-Qaeda here in the United States from approximately 2007 till my arrest in 2011. I would say that he appeared on our radar rather late, but was an active member.
We'll reflect on some of the awkward choices now facing us in combating terror.
To the sick and evil extremists who commit these hideous crimes, we will defeat you.
Believe it or not, the US president has taken exception to the London mayor. How will the government respond?
After Donald Trump's tweet, I've learnt that Whitehall is going cold on his proposed state visit.
We'll get the White House view from this Trump advisor. And as the city returns to wary normality, how should Londoners respond?
But it's tough when you've got children and you're dropping them
tough.
at school a road away from where it happened, and you know, you don't feel necessarily safe doing that, but life has to go on.
We'll debate the best way to root out extremism. Good evening. Well, London got back to normal today. It has to, really. But the word normal has an ominous connotation. Is terror on the streets a normality to which we now have to resign ourselves? Is it set to become like the ghastly shooting sprees in the US, where the angrily insane too frequently manage to kill several people before killing themselves? As it happens, a disgruntled employee did that in Orlando in Florida today, taking the lives of 5 others. Well, no country can be relaxed about random murder, and so it is no surprise that here the London Bridge attack has had political fallout, and it's led to inevitable soul-searching as to whether we're preventing attacks as effectively as we should be. One of the attackers was a well-known jihadi. He had mixed with other prominent extremists. John Sweeney's been piecing together what we know about him and the other who's been named.
These are the faces of 2 of the 3 men who killed 7 people on London Bridge on Saturday night. Rashid Redouane is a Moroccan with Irish nationality, of whom little is known. The identity of a second killer has not yet been revealed by the police. But the third, Karam Butt, was the jihadi killer who not just hid in plain sight, he starred in a TV documentary.
This way, lads! Come here a bit, come here.
The group display the black flag of Islam, a symbol associated with Islamic armies for the past 1,200 years. But
the 26-year-old from Barking made little secret of his sympathy for so-called Islamic State. Here he is praying by an Islamist flag used by IS. This is the home of Karam Butt. The blue tarpaulin of the police forensic team there behind me. Now, there's been 3 terrorist attacks in Britain in the last 3 months. Westminster Bridge, the attacker, there were very few clues as to the likelihood that Khalid Massoud would do what he did. Salman Abedi, the Manchester bomber, there were some clues, but to be fair to MI5 and the police, they were fuzzy. But this man, the bad news is there were a ton of clues that he was a potential jihadi suspect. Newsnight spoke to his neighbours who, off camera, told us that he was well known locally for rebuking Muslim women who didn't wear hijabs and for inviting non-Muslim children to join the faith. But this man knew him as a neighbour.
It's really sad to know what happened. It's really, honestly, it's really sad. And I am just feeling like he might be being used by someone or brainwashed by someone. 2 witnesses told us Karam Butt had prayed at this mosque.
Good. Hello. Hi. From BBC Newsnight. We understand that one of the attackers at London Bridge used to attend this mosque and apparently came here on Friday. Is that right?
Well, I do not know anything. We just go, there are 4 or 5 mosques here. So we go here and there. I never come from Friday here. So I don't know nothing. I can tell you anything about that, you see.
There are mosques in the East End which have hosted extremist preachers in the past, but this isn't one of them. They commit these atrocities in the name of Islam.
Our Quran doesn't allow
people to do or act against humanity or killing or any kind of terrorism. It is very clear.
Karam Butt had been a member of Al-Muhajirun, an Islamist extremist group banned in 2005, but so well penetrated by the police and security services that its adherents were often not seen as a great threat. After Saturday night, that assumption no longer stands.
Karam Butt was a member of Al-Muhajirun going back some years, and I was one of the chief radicalizers and recruiters for Al-Qaeda here in the United States from approximately 2007 till my arrest in 2011. I would say that he appeared on our radar rather late, but was an active member inside of our PalTalk communication platform services that we offered to those we were attempting to radicalize. He was an administrator inside a pro-Al-Muhajirun, what you call a room, and I had intimate connections with him because we would frequently speak before they would, and he would, as an administrator, he would have to communicate with me about the length of my speeches, the content of my speeches, and how they might blend with Al-Muhajirunist preachers that would follow.
So questions for the Muslim community, but also questions for the police and for the people who work in the building behind me, MI5. It's their job to gather intelligence so that they can protect us. And clearly they've failed. There were a lot of red flags to the ringleader of the London Bridge attacks. But, to be fair, their long list of potential jihadi suspects has got 23,000 names on it. The short list, 3,000 names on it. Have they failed? Yes. Were they bound to fail? The answer to that is also, regrettably, yes. More than a dozen jihadi plots in Britain have been thwarted in the last few years. But in the past 3 months, something has shifted. The people making all the running are those who create terror.
John Sweeney there. Well, the Met confirmed tonight that all of the 12 people they arrested in the wake of the attack have been released without charge. But the investigation into the attackers and their associates carries on, obviously. Well, our correspondent Richard Watson has covered Islamist extremists for almost 20 years. And Richard, the name Al-Muhajirun is not an unfamiliar one to you. What is the significance of the man's link to that?
It's very significant, actually, I think. I remember I started investigating Al-Muhajirun in 2004, 9/11. I was filming in a meeting in East London in 2004 where they celebrated the 9/11 attacks as being the magnificent 19 terrorists. So they are very dangerous. They have very dangerous views. I think in the early 2000s they were dismissed as fools. And I remember speaking to a member of the Joint Intelligence Committee at the time, and he told me that there was a failure of imagination about the consequences of harbouring these kind of extremists in our society.
Right. What are the security services saying today?
Well, I spoke to a security source tonight, and interestingly, he didn't really say that they were after new resources or new laws. Very wary about speaking about anything too firm in the election week, of course. But I got the distinct impression that the resources is not the major issue. There are two major issues about softer ways of approaching this problem. Number one, do you attack the ideology, as the Prime Minister Theresa May has been suggesting, or do you actually look for longer-term solutions, giving young people who are potentially drawn down this path alternative avenues, an alternative sense of belonging to British society?
Right. Richard, thank you very much. Well, normally the political rule is that right-wing parties score more highly with the public on security issues than left-wing parties, but it's a measure of how strange politics is at the moment that much of today has seen the Conservatives on the defensive over whether Theresa May, as Home Secretary, had allowed cuts in police numbers to go too far. Well, there was a vigil in London this evening, just next to City Hall, at which the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, spoke. Just after that event, I asked him, in the rain, if resources are an issue for the fight against terror.
Well, I've been saying now for months, in fact since I first became the Mayor, that we need more resources for London. It is a fact that over the last 7 years, the Met Police has lost £600 million. As a result, the Met Police has had to reduce staff, 3,000 staff lost, close police stations, and over the course of the next 3 years, there are plans to cut a further £400 million from the Met Police budget. There are plans to change the police funding formula, which means we can lose up to another £700 million, and it's simply not sustainable. We are a global city. We know we're a target for the terrorists, and we've got to do all that we can to keep our city safe. And one of the first things I did as mayor was to approve an additional 600 armed officers. I don't believe all our officers should be armed, but I do believe in having a decent number of highly trained armed officers to make sure they can respond quickly and swiftly as they did on Saturday night.
And are you finding Theresa May is happy, is receptive of that message?
Well, look, I've been lobbying unsuccessfully for the last 13 months, and it's really important that the government of the day recognises we need more resources here at London. And my job as the Mayor of London, whose primary focus has to be the security of London, I'm not going to be afraid of saying we're not getting the resources we need. We've lost resources over the last 7 years, and the current government's plans for the next 3 years are further cuts from London. That will have an impact on London, whether it's officers lost, or whether it's other resources being lost. And I'll tell you this, I speak to the experts regularly, and the experts tell me one of the best ways to keep us safe is policing by consent. Members of the public having confidence in the police, to give them intelligence about people they're worried about, people who are dodgy, people who have become radicalised. And that's why I've restored neighbourhood policing. We can only do that with resources. You know, more bobbies on the beat makes us all safe from terrorists.
Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, talking to me earlier, well, clearly he was saying police resources are an issue. But of course, anti-terror legislation is as well. The powers of the security forces to shoot to kill, for example, or listen in on private conversations or read messages. Well, on these issues, the Tories feel themselves on firmer ground. The election campaign was back in full swing today, and Nick Watt, our political editor, has been looking at how terror has affected it.
Even the most finely tuned election campaign can hit unexpected bumps. Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn are finding that their past is catching up with them as they seek to persuade voters they are best placed to deal with terrorism.
So please, for your sake, and for the thousands of police officers who work so hard every day, this crying wolf has to stop.
The Prime Minister's claim that she is the strongest guardian of the nation's security sits uncomfortably next to the cut in police officers during her time as Home Secretary.
We had a debate about anti-terror legislation in Parliament the other day. Now, I've been involved in opposing anti-terror legislation ever since I first went into Parliament in 1983.
And the claim by the Labour leader that he would consider whatever proposals the police and security services bring forward doesn't quite chime with his record as a backbencher.
This was meant to be the Brexit general election, so no one could have foreseen that the final days would be dominated by terrorism. Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn both believe that the attacks in Manchester and here at London Bridge highlight weaknesses in their opponents, but there are also pitfalls for the two leaders.
The Prime Minister found herself under strong pressure today over police numbers. Belt-tightening by the coalition government saw police numbers fall by around 20,000 between 2010 and 2015. Theresa May claimed today there will be an uplift in the number of armed police officers. But the number of armed police officers fell from around 7,000 in 2010 to just over 5,500 in 2016. The government committed last year to recruit an extra 1,500 by 2021.
Crime is changing as well. Our demands that have been placed on the police service is changing. We are becoming more responsive rather than looking for things, rather than being proactive in our delivery to the public and engaging with the public. We can't continue to do that. That's fire service policing. We need to engage more with our communities. We need to ensure that the intelligence that is coming from them is able to be built and acted upon.
And then there are questions about the Prime Minister's claim that Britain has been too tolerant of extremism when she said enough is enough.
You've said that the time has come to tackle not just violent extremism, but extremist ideology.
Does that mean that you've changed your mind? Because you'll remember that you had a very public row with Michael Gove in 2014 when he said that you and your officials were prepared to tackle violent extremism but not extremist ideology.
Well, I've been very, very clear throughout, actually, that it wasn't just about violent extremism, it was about extremism. And that's why, when I was Home Secretary, we introduced the counter-extremism strategy. You can look back, I've made various speeches over the years where I have said that we do need to deal with extremism, not just the violent extremism.
I wasn't, to be frank, quite sure what she meant by enough is enough, given that she has been in central command in this area for 7 years. Now, a lot of work has gone on. Our security and intelligence services and the police work really, really hard. We need to reflect and wait to see whether this is a resources issue or an intelligence issue or an analysis issue. But clearly, 3 incidents in 3 months is deep cause for concern.
Keir Starmer was speaking at a meeting of unions representing emergency workers who condemned the cut in police numbers. Critics might say to deflect attention from Jeremy Corbyn's voting record opposing anti-terror legislation. The sombre atmosphere across the country was reflected in a vigil in London this evening. Never before has Britain seen 2 major terror attacks in an election campaign. Whatever the result, the impact of these past 2 weeks will be felt for many years to come.
Nick Watt, and Nick is with me now. And Nick, because there is another political dimension to this which involves the United States and Donald Trump and his reaction to Saturday night's tragedy. Now, tell us how it played out.
Donald Trump has criticised Sadiq Khan after appearing to misunderstand the very clear statement from the London Mayor on Sunday that Londoners should not be alarmed by the increased police presence in the city after the London Bridge attack. And in a tweet on Sunday that we should be able to see there we are, you see that the President suggested that Sadiq Khan was saying that people should not be alarmed by terrorism. And Sadiq Khan's office made clear that the President had completely distorted his remarks. But then the President came back again today with another tweet, and he accused, as you can see there, the Mayor of making a pathetic excuse after his remarks on the no reason to be alarmed statement.
MSM, mainstream media, for those who don't follow that. What's been the reaction?
Well, I spoke to one minister who said this to me: President Trump has dug himself a hole, but is not magnanimous enough to dig himself out of it. And this does raise interesting questions about the proposed state visit by Donald Trump to this country. You'll remember that Theresa May, quick off the mark, made an offer of that back in January. This evening on Channel 4 News, Sadiq Khan said that that state visit should now not go ahead. And interestingly, it's becoming pretty clear in Whitehall that that state visit really is unlikely to happen anytime soon. One Whitehall source told me for the last few months, the visit has been in the pretty long and getting longer grass. It appears that the President is concerned about the opposition that he's likely to meet in this country, and there will be few tears shed in Whitehall if it doesn't happen. And I get the impression that were Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister on Friday, I wouldn't be surprised if he cancelled that visit.
Nick, thank you very much. Well, I spoke a little earlier about all of this to Sebastian Gorka, who is one of President Trump's national security advisors. So why was the President tweeting criticism of a London mayor at this particular time?
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment. But if this is going to be another discussion about a tweet for 6 minutes, then it really, again, is something that is unseemly. But the President was making a very, very valid point that we have to jettison political correctness. We have to apply honesty to the threat, and saying it's just business as usual, don't worry about a thing, a Pollyannish attitude to a threat that has killed 170 people in the last 2 years in Europe alone and maimed more than 700 has to be dealt with honestly.
OK, I see that. But then isn't the right response for people to sort of get together in a constructive mindset and say nice things and useful things rather than just, you know, pathetic excuse by London Mayor Sadiq Khan? This is the bit I don't understand. In what way was the tweet, and I know it's just a tweet, but in what way is it helpful to call something he says a pathetic excuse?
Well, again, I'll talk one more time about this tweet, but it would be much more useful for the BBC's viewers and, the alliance between the UK and Britain in general to talk about real policy issues and not tweets. The point is, we will not come together adequately to the task in hand unless people talk honestly about the threat to London, the threat to Washington, the threat to DC, the threat to Paris, and that's what the president was writing about.
Right. And that's a very important substantive point. It's not just a tweet, it's a substantive point. But your point then is that other people are talking dishonestly about it. The Mayor of London or the UK authorities. Who and in what way are the people you're focused on as talking dishonestly about the threat?
It's those people who spin absolute fabulous fantasies and don't deal with the threat at hand.
Is Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is he one of those people?
If his statements are meant to deny the reality of the threat, then he could be. But I'm not going to talk for him. Right. You should ask him yourself.
Well, I know his answer is that he's not. And I sensed your frustration that I was asking you about your boss's tweet. And I know in other interviews you've said it's just a tweet. It's not, you stop banging on about tweets. It's not policy. Is it useful to have him tweeting random thoughts, getting into little arguments? I mean, if it isn't policy, isn't it getting in the way of clarity of message? Because here I am, all confused. I was thinking he was being critical of somebody when he says things like pathetic excuse by London Mayor. And actually, you've put me right and explained he's not being critical. He doesn't even know what the London Mayor's views are. So what is the benefit of this communication by tweet policy?
I'm sorry, I can't help you with your confusion. What is the benefit? That is how a businessman who's never held elective office won the election. He out-trounced the mainstream left-wing liberal media. That's the value of Twitter. Not everything is about policy. Some things are about strategic communications. A stump speech is about strategic communications, as is the president's Twitter account.
Got it. I mean, for reasons that you will probably not understand or not want to hear, a lot of people here are being very critical of President Trump for picking an argument with the London Mayor at a time when the city has been facing an attack.
And I'm glad you're talking for them.
I'm just summarising what I've picked up. Quite a few people are suggesting, in the political circles, that it would be inappropriate for President Trump to have a state visit to the UK. Do you think he'd be bothered if the state visit was cancelled or called off, or at least for the time being?
If anybody thinks that a state visit is held hostage to Twitter, then they have no understanding of the relationship between London and Washington. And that is a sad, sad day for anybody who thinks that.
So you think all this talk that, oh dear, we better not have the state visit, or we shouldn't have the state visit, is just silly talk, and the state visit will happen in your view?
I think if you ask Theresa May, if you ask the people I work with here at your embassy and who come here regularly to talk to us, I think they'd have a very different answer about the importance of a visit between two of the closest democracies in the world today.
Sebastian Gorka there, not his first outing on this programme. Now we can continue the conversation with Chuka Umunna, who was a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee. And on the line from Wakefield, we're joined by Baroness Varsi, Saida Varsi, former Conservative Minister for Faith and Communities. Her recent book, The Enemy Within, A Tale of Muslim Britain, looks into the flaws in government rhetoric on extremism. Perhaps I can just start with you both on the state visit thing. I'm not going to get stuck on Trump, but Saida Varsi, are you one who thinks basically the state visit should be off now, or...?
Look, I mean, my views on the state visit are already on record. I feel that a state visit is the is an honour of the highest order, where we lay out the red carpet, pomp and ceremony, Her Majesty hosts. And I just think for a man who, long before he started insulting London's mayor, was a man who showed disdain for women. He had little respect for minorities, black people, Mexicans, Latinos, little regard for the LGBT community, mocked the disabled. And when London came under attack, he thought the best way of helping us was to attack the mayor of London. You know, his record is before us, and I think what Nick was saying earlier about the visit being kicked into the long grass is what is best for us now. I think we should just keep kicking this visit into the long grass.
And Shukramuna, if Corbyn wins, there's not going to be a state visit, a Trump state visit, is there, with them riding in the carriage together? Or...
I hope there's no state visit, I have to say. I agree with every word that Saida just said about the president, and frankly, a period of silence from him would be very welcome. I think he's been incredibly insensitive, turning this into some kind of row. But also, if he comes here, given his unpopularity, just think about the huge police resource which is going to have to go into manning that state visit. I mean, with the threat level as it is at the moment, I would much rather that our police and security services were focused on some of the challenges we have here, keeping our country safe, than, frankly, being distracted by a president who, as Saida has shown, is perhaps one of the most divisive politicians in the Western world. And right now, we need to be coming together.
Let's quickly go into enough is enough and what you understand by that. And Saida Vazi, what do you understand by enough is enough? And do you support it? Because most are interpreting it as an extension of a kind of antipathy towards ideological or people with quite extreme views who are not violent. They're not killing people. Do you think it's right to start turning attention to them?
I think what Theresa said in her statement, alongside enough is enough, is that there was 4 specific areas which she wanted to look at again, and that included closing down the space online as well as offline. It included revisiting a look at policies on segregation to tackle segregation and separation. But I think the strongest point that she made was that in a new age where we have a new emerging threat, we're going to review our counter-terrorism strategy, and that includes how we prepare for an attack, how we pursue extremists, how we protect the United Kingdom, and also how we prevent people from becoming terrorists.
But I just want to push you. You're happy with, if it became, and most would interpret it this way, I think, if it became government policy that we need to close down some of the people who have been, if you like, closer to the jihadists but are actually not jihadists, would you say that is a good thing, that is what we need to do now? Or is that misguided?
Look, we have about 20 to 23,000 people who are people of interest. And I have no concerns whatsoever if we look again as to how we make sure that we are watching these people. We look again at the TPIMS regime, the successor to the control orders, to see whether we can use them in a different way, whether we can change the conditions around those TPIMS. So I have no issues with that. I think the concern that I have is in relation to the prevent strategy, which up to now has had huge concerns around it. We've had people like the George Soros Foundation, Open Society, Rights Watch, led by Helena Kennedy, QC. We've had ex-police officers, intelligence services, even the government's own independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, David Anderson, say it is time for a review of Prevent. And I hope that the government does genuinely review Prevent as part of its review of the contest strategy.
Shukra, I want to get right to this issue of how harsh you should be on people whose views are not, if you like, mainstream, but who are not jihadists. Do we see them as the kind of gateway to jihadism, or do you see them as the gate needs to be shut, or not?
Well, they could be, and of course, one of the challenges for the police and security services is that if they intervene too soon, they may not get the information as to what has been planned, which may come about. But I have to say, I mean, in response to the Prime Minister's speech, she talks as if she hasn't been in charge of the Home Office for the last few years. I mean, I think there are a number of things. Police resourcing is definitely an issue. All the evidence we've taken on the Home Affairs Select Committee points to local neighbourhood policing being perhaps the most valuable source of intelligence in thwarting...
Why aren't you proposing to reinstate the police jobs that have been cut? You 20,000 down and you're putting 10,000 back. I mean, that's... implies that you agree with half of the cuts that Theresa May has made.
Well, I think in an ideal world, you'd get the numbers up beyond 10,000, but you'd probably have to ask the Shadow Home Office team. I can't necessarily speak to every single detail of that, but that is definitely an issue. I think, secondly, I agree with Saida on Prevent. There is a real problem, and, you know, I remember taking some evidence from some young people in Bradford. There's a real problem with the way it operates. You have a large group of young Muslim people who basically feel that this has turned them into a suspect community, and they're being asked to explain and apologise for acts that they see having nothing to do, frankly, with Islamic teaching whatsoever. And on the cyber side of things, I mean, there were much tighter controls as to what people subject to control orders could do as compared to TPIMs. I think one thing that is absolutely clear from the evidence that we've taken over the last
few... was your scheme and
that's
the
right.
Labour scheme.
I mean, and I disagreed with control orders being done away with, but definitely the social media companies, there needs to be so much more done in respect of them. And they in the end, for them to act is going to dent their profits. And if they are not prepared to spend the monies, and police do, then frankly, government should force them to pay for that, much in the way that football clubs are forced to contribute to policing, because we can't just leave them to police themselves. It's not working.
We need to stop, but you've raised so many issues, both of you. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, we've become depressingly familiar with the rituals of terror after the condemnations and messages of sympathy, the determined insistence that we'll not let such attacks change the way we live. And by yesterday morning, barely 36 hours after Saturday's carnage, a semblance of normality had returned to London Bridge, with thousands of commuters streaming across the river as they do every day. But is the reassuring picture of a city keeping calm and carrying on all it seems? Gabriel Gatehouse reports.
Bridges, the arteries of a city, the things that functioning societies build between communities. They are vital and they are vulnerable.
The van was zigzagging along the pavement and it looked like it was aiming, from my opinion, it was aiming for groups of people.
Keep moving, guys, keep moving this way, please. We saw an injured person on the pavement on the left-hand side and a little bit further an injured person on the road. We had obviously arrived in the aftermath of a terrorist attack.
And this taxi driver pulled up, swerved towards me and screamed, "Please, run, you've got to run now, get back, get back." And I turned around and I just saw this man with this huge blade and I just ran as fast as I could.
I then looked up to see a guy leaving the restaurant just next to where we were, and he was holding his chest or his neck. He was absolutely covered in blood and he was staggering through the market.
This morning, less than 36 hours later, London Bridge was back open, the city back at work.
There's something so reassuring about this. We feel comforted by what looks like an almost immediate return to normality, even if it is the Monday morning commute. It gives us a feeling that no matter how horrific, terror cannot fundamentally change our society.
But in the shadow of Borough Market, where a police cordon is still in place, nothing about this morning felt normal.
It's tough when you've got children and you're dropping them
tough.
at school a road away from where it happened, and you don't feel necessarily safe doing that, but life has to go on. It makes me angry. At the moment I feel quite numb because obviously having children who we have to discuss these things with, who have no understanding of what's happening.
And they're just like, why would people do that, Mummy? Like,
And how do you explain that to your kids?
Well, you just have to state facts.
Richard Angel, who runs a centre-left think tank, was in a restaurant nearby when one of the knife-wielding attackers burst in.
It wasn't really until we were evacuated, making our way through the streets, avoiding the shoes that people had kicked off as they were running away, dropped wallets, blood, victims, paramedics, police officers, and we got outside the cordoned-off area, and just that sense of relief. Going around counting that all your friends were there. I made eye contact with a woman on the next table who we'd kind of had this totally silent but quite strong bond with throughout the whole thing. Made sure the pregnant lady was in a safe place. And then we were told we weren't safe and we had to move again.
For those caught up in the attacks especially, there is a tension between the question of what is to be done and the urge to carry on as usual.
Of course we should fund our secret services and the defence and the police and others who who deal with this stuff, and there's very many problems out there that can be dealt with. Of course, there's things we should do about international funding of mosques and sending textbooks that are inappropriate to madrasas and schools and various other things. But I refuse to give these people a victory, and I think most British people, the Londoners and the Mancunians that have led a beautiful response to such hate, want to do the same.
The morning after, the Sunday, community leaders gathered to do what community leaders do, try to rebuild bridges. Leaders of the local mosque found themselves in the familiar position of having to distance themselves from an atrocity they had nothing to do with, of having to explain what Islam is not.
Islam means peace, and it's got nothing to do with these kind of, heinous, barbaric actions. It's got nothing to do with Islam.
I think everyone would agree that that's the kind of thing that people ought to be saying in the aftermath of what's just happened. View from taking hold.
I think your question, in the name of Islam, I can't see or recognise how that is the case.
This is a mixed neighbourhood. Tourists and city workers rub shoulders with working class communities from different backgrounds. In private, not everyone has responded to the attacks with a message of unity. Well, I just spoke to one lady who said, I'd do a Trump, kick them all out. Another gentleman said to me, we're at breaking point now, we need to start looking after our own. Now, these may not be the majority opinion. They're certainly not the kinds of opinions that people want to express in front of the television cameras, but they are out there. Long before the perpetrators were identified this evening, assumptions were made. Will Heaven, a journalist, arrived on London Bridge just moments after the attackers struck.
Really quickly, everyone seemed to know what it was and knew what sort of a situation they were in.
Each attack, carried out in the name of Islam, however perverted a version, contributes to a corrosive picture.
I don't think anyone that was there on Saturday night caught up in it, the victims' families, the emergency services. I don't think anyone will be in any doubt as to why these people carried out the attack and what ideology would have inspired them to do it. I don't really think we're having an honest debate when the focus is on whether there have been too many cuts to the emergency services and that kind of thing. As far as I could see, that response was flawless on Saturday night.
On London's other bridges, protective barriers went up overnight. At Westminster, they know what damage can be done with just a vehicle and a knife. They know too that security measures alone are not enough to keep the country safe or united.
Gabriel Gatehouse, as we heard earlier, the Prime Minister has been talking tough about the need for a new response to terror. But how does society balance the need for security with our desire for civil liberty? Well, Henna Rai founded the Women Against Radicalisation Network, and Anis Alakriti is CEO of the think tank, the Cordoba Foundation. Evening to you both.
Good evening.
I really want to focus on these people who are not violent, but who were the kind of people that were hanging around in the ambience of one of the killers we know. What do you think our attitude should be to that? Those extreme positions, non-violent.
It's a difficult question. We need to address the issues that are contributing towards these people who are essentially non-violent to begin with, but then move on to do violent acts later on. What is the actual cause behind it, and what that root cause is, how we can actually tackle that?
But what's your gut instinct? Do you think we just stand blithely by while people express views that are very anti-Western, very extreme, maybe even flirting with the ISIS, but who seem to show no sign of actually wanting to attack us or kill us?
Well, actually, if that was the solution to it, I would never have founded my organisation, which was in response to such views. And the other issue is we don't address the fact that there is an ideology that people do buy into.
There is an ideology.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And sorry, you think the ideology does relate to what the killers buy into.
Whatever the grievances or the issues initially are, there is an ultimate ideology that they do buy into. We need to address this and talk about the elephant in the room.
Ennis, is that correct, do you think?
I always have a problem when politicians start talking about ideology. I don't think it's their mandate. I don't think it's their remit. I don't think they're good at it. In fact, if anything, I think that they make things worse. They don't understand it. And the nature of politics is about short-termism. And you can't deal with, understand, grapple with, and try to counter or reform ideology within the term of any particular government. So the first thing I think that the government needs to do is to stay away from ideology. The other thing is that we need to understand...
That's a very big thing to say. I mean,
it is.
But there are people who are promoting hate out of those groups.
And doing it in the name of Islam.
I would argue that ideas are best fought with ideas. They're not fought with either bullets or security or ratting on. Simply, you're giving credence, you're giving longevity, you're giving credibility to those who have what is essentially very minor ideas outside the mainstream community.
It is these ideas that are causing them to actually turn around and perpetrate that. We're talking about we're talking about the Islamist ideology that these people subscribe to and ascribe to, which is that of anti-Western sentiment. It is that of hate.
99.9% of Muslims don't subscribe to that.
However, the loudest voices at this moment in time are of those extremists and their sympathisers who actually have a legitimate platform here in the UK. Yes,
go around the mosques, up and down the country. Point to one particular mosque.
There are many organisations who call themselves representatives of Muslims within the UK. However, they will subscribe to sectarianism. They will subscribe to sympathy with extremist ideology.
I would suggest that those are rejected by the mainstream.
Of course, they're rejected by the mainstream. The issue is how you deal with the small number who are not. Would your foundation, would your beliefs, do you fear be classed as extreme if we went down this route of saying the non-violent
Well, that's
extremists?
the thing, Evan.
Would you be one of them?
We have a serious problem here in society today. We never thought... I mean, I'm almost 50, and I've spent all my life here in Britain. We never feared ideas. We never feared people who had sort of strange...
No, but we didn't have a pocket of these things that was leading to this particular problem.
We always had... No. We're just in a particular position whereby we have what I would call almost an industry that thrives on the fact that we have these challenges. I would suggest this. Why is it that we fear those with what we call controversial ideas so much? Why is it that today we are shutting down political debate, we are shutting down people expressing their views, expressing their sentiments, and what is happening? We are driving people who are part of society, who want the best for their country, the best for their people. We're driving them more and more towards the extremists.
That is the point, isn't it? So if you go after those people, and that might include Ennis here, if you go after them, you do then alienate another group of people and perhaps push more people to the very extreme, which is what you're trying to avoid in the first place.
The issue that we have here is the fact that many people are now pandering to a victimhood ideology as Muslims, as part of the Muslim community, that we are being alienated. If you raise the issues of extremism and Islamism within the community, you are demonising an entire Muslim community, whereas that is not what we're here to do. If there wasn't a problem, organisations like mine would not exist. And there is a clear problem. We need to address that problem.
I fear that where we are at today is that anyone who speaks outside a particular boundary, which is narrowing more and more and more, unfortunately, due to the politicians getting involved with trying to reform ideology, I feel what's happening is that we are classifying more and more people who could do good. How many people, amongst the people, Hannah, that you are working against, how many of those could have had a conversation and stopped Salman Abedi from doing what he did? How many people could have stopped the killers on Saturday do what they did? But the problem is that they are being... Believe you me.
These are organisations that have previously called jihadists
I'm not talking about necessarily
people.
about organisations. Why is it that you're really
hang up
about organisations?
No, because individuals
we have 3 million
are part
Muslims,
of these organisations.
We have 3 million British Muslims who care about about their country, who care about their people,
But
who
everybody
are
knows
horrified
that.
about the attacks that happened on Saturday and
And
before that on
everybody
Manchester.
acknowledges that.
Unfortunately, you are excluding a big chunk of
I
those
am
simply
not
because
excluding-
they express views that you don't like. And
We need
that's
to
the
leave it
problem.
there. I'm so sorry. We really do need to leave it there. Points taken. Thank you very much, Henna. Thank you very much, both of you. Well, tributes were being paid today to those caught up in Saturday's attack. 7 people died, killed either by the van on the bridge or in the frenzied knife attacks which followed. Tonight, just one has been officially named. 30-year-old Christine Archibald from Canada died in the arms of her fiancé after being struck by the van. Her family paid tribute to their beautiful, loving daughter and sister. Later, relatives of a missing London man, James McMullen, said they believed he was among the dead, although his body has not yet been formally identified. His sister, Melissa, spoke at the bridge.
This morning we received news from the police that my brother's bank card was found on one of the bodies from Saturday night's brutal attack, but they are unable to formally identify him until the coroner's report begins tomorrow. We would like to send our condolences to the relatives and loved ones of all the people who lost their lives. Our thoughts are with them also at this time. We would like to thank all the members of the services who did their utmost to serve and protect the population of London from these deranged and deluded individuals.
James McMullen's sister. Well, 36 people were still being treated in 5 London hospitals today. Our special correspondent, Katie Razzle, talked to Dr Malcolm Tunnicliffe, the Clinical Director of Emergency Medicine at King's College Hospital. He raced to work as soon as he heard the attack had happened.
Whilst I was driving, the major incident plan was obviously enacted, and staff came from a variety of different places. Some were at home, some were actually out in London, and I believe a number of our staff were actually near the events that happened and came straight to King's. First things he say to the patients when they come in, if they can hear you and are conscious, is you're safe, we're going to look after you, you're going to be fine. The scene was certainly very, very busy in our emergency department here. There are large numbers of patients obviously being treated simultaneously. But what struck me was the calm nature in which it was all being done. I think people often expect to be lots of shouting and carrying on, but teams were very calm, focused on their patients, focusing on the care that they needed to give.
What kinds of injuries were you seeing, and had you seen injuries on that scale before?
So the predominant injuries we saw were stab wounds, predominantly to the head, the neck, the chest and the abdomen. A number of patients will also have had defensive wounds as well, where they've tried to protect themselves from being stabbed. We see a large number of stab wounds and patients who have been stabbed at King's, but nothing really on this scale has ever happened here before. There are also a number of patients who came in with blunt force trauma, obviously from being hit by a vehicle on London Bridge. You can lose a large amount of blood through multiple fractures themselves as well, so splinting bones in the first instance, then doing definitive repair of it later on is very, very important. I think everyone deals with incidents like this in a different way. I will talk to my family, my friends, my colleagues at work, but perhaps the most important thing is not to bottle this in. We are trained and practice for events like this. We can manage events like this. We don't want to do it, but we accept that something like this is likely to happen again. We should be rightly proud of all the staff in the NHS, not just here at King's, but those in the ambulance service, other hospitals in London, and the police, of course, for their response to the attack.
Dr Malcolm Tunnicliffe from King's College Hospital talking to Katie Razzle. Sometimes feels as though the debate as to what to do about terror in practical terms can go round and round in circles, and no more so perhaps in relation to the arguments around the internet giants. There are rows about whether the authorities should be given a master key to all encrypted material, which is tricky. And there are also issues around the alleged ability of the evil to strut around the internet with too little inhibition. Theresa May yesterday suggested more must be done to stop it. So how easy is it to access extremist material online? Our policy editor Chris Cook spoke to Oxford University's Elizabeth Kendall, who monitors jihadist material on the web.
This week, there's been a lot of focus on the web giants. Have social media, in particular, allowed violent hate to cover the globe? We asked an academic who follows online Islamist radicalism about whether that problem has been getting worse.
Well, you can certainly still find extremist material online,
but it's not as easy as it used to be. Let me give you an example. There's a video, which I won't name, by a prominent militant extremist preacher, which came out recently. And just before coming here, I tried to Google it, find it, watch it again on YouTube, and it wasn't there, it had been taken down. Now, a year or so ago, there's no way that that would have been taken down. It would have been around. It would have been much easier to find.
Accounts promoting violent extremist material using simple search terms will tend to get taken down very rapidly.
In the old days, you know, it used to be a badge of honour when you got your account erased or suspended. I think once that's happened maybe 9 or 10 times, it starts to become a pain. You have to start from zero again each time. And therefore, we find that militant extremists are now using other platforms.
So we were able to find that video, though, on a service called Telegram. So could you tell me about what makes Telegram useful for jihadis?
The most useful thing about Telegram is that, as the name suggests, you're sending messages. And normally that works via groups in the militant jihad context. So you can sign up to a group, you can join it, but you can't find that group very easily because you can't just type in and search for the name of the group, like the Islamic State or Qa'idat al-Jihad. You have to know what their user name is, their user address is, before you can join the group. And that's normally quite a complicated collection of letters and numbers that you would not be able to guess.
And why don't the authorities just shut down these groups in the way they have been going after these YouTube videos?
Well, I think it's much more difficult to shut down Telegram, partly because it's encrypted, so it's secret.
So because it's encrypted, it means that we can either see what's being sent, nor can we see which individuals are downloading, say, these radical videos.
Yes, and that's quite an important point you make, because they are downloading videos directly from Telegram. You no longer need to use links to external sites, as you would normally for longer videos in other applications like Twitter. You can actually do everything on Telegram. If I were a curious wannabe militant jihadi, I would probably find a way of still getting hold of this material online. It's not as easy, but with a will, there's still a way. It needs much greater policing.
So it's not easy to stumble into violent extremist material, but encrypted applications provide it for those who want it.
Chris Cook, and we did ask the big technology firms to join us on the programme tonight, but nobody was available. And that is all we have time for. We have an election on Thursday. The programme will be coming to you from Walsall tomorrow night as polling day approaches. But from all of us for now, good night.